I was born on May 21, 1960, in a cramped Ohio house that sagged under the weight of silence. When it wasn't splitting at the seams, the air clung thick with bleach and burnt coffee, a sour cocktail that seeped into the wallpaper, yellowed and brittle, like the pages of a Bible left in the rain. The walls were so thin I could hear the neighbor's TV static hissing through the plaster, a white noise that drowned out everything except my parents' fights. Those weren't fights, though. They were ceremonies. My father, a chemist with hands perpetually stained by iodine and failure, would dissect my mother's mind with the precision of a lab report. His words were sterile, surgical, irrational, unstable. A bird. She'd clutch her vodka glass like a lifeline, ice cubes clinking like fractured bones, her knuckles blanching to the color of old marble. Sometimes she'd press the rim to her lips so hard it left a crimson crescent, a half moon bleeding into the crystal. I'd crouch in the hallway, knees digging into the frayed carpet, picking at the wallpaper where it curled like dead skin. Behind it, the plaster cracked in spiderweb patterns, and I'd imagine pulling it all down to find what festered beneath, black mold maybe, or the fossilized remains of something that had died screaming. My mother's sobs followed me, wet and guttural, a sound that reminded me of the stray dog I'd once found choking on its own blood in the alley behind our house. She'd collapse onto the linoleum kitchen floor, her floral dress pooling around her like melted wax, while my father loomed in the doorway, adjusting his glasses as if she were a miscalibration in an experiment. By 6, I'd started collecting relics, not toys or baseball cards, but the carcasses of things the world had discarded. The sparrow with a neck bent like a question mark, its feathers still quivering with the ghost of flight. A possum, belly split open by tires spilling a kaleidoscope of entrails onto the asphalt. I'd bury them in shoebox coffins beneath the porch, whispering half-remembered hymns as I patted the dirt flat. Weeks later I'd exhume them, breath catching at the way nature had sculpted their bones. Ivory filaments, delicate as lace yet unyielding as truth. I lined my windowsill with jam jars full of teeth I pried from raccoon skulls, and when the sunlight hit them just right, they glowed like pearls. My father found my collection once. He hovered in the doorway of my room, lab coat smudged with acid burns, and said, "Fascinating. A scientist in the making." He didn't notice the rabbit rib I tucked under my pillow, its curve fitting perfectly in the palm of my hand. That night I pressed it to my tongue, savoring the iron tang of decay, and wondered what it would feel like to crack something alive open and count its secrets. By 8, I'd begun curating my museum of the dead. The sparrow came first, its neck snapped mid-flight, a twist of cartilage and sinew, holding its head at a cruel angle. Its feathers, once iridescent as oil on pavement, were clotted with dried blood and dew, matted into a grotesque crown. I cradled it in my palms, thumbing the hollow bones of its wings, imagining the moment its tiny heart burst, like an overripe berry. Next was the possum, its belly swollen into a taut drumskin of gas, legs stiff as rusted hinges. Ants poured from its eye sockets in a shimmering black ribbon, carrying chunks of gelatinous orb to their queen. I watched them work, mesmerized, until the stench of rot, sweet and meaty, like spoiled honey, drove me to bury it. Beneath the porch in a shoebox lined with newspaper comics, I marked the graves with popsicle sticks, counting the days until resurrection. When I dug them up weeks later, the earth had worked its magic. Flesh sloughed away in gray-green rags, tendons dissolved into sludge. The bones emerged pristine, glistening under a film of decay. The possum's skull grinned up at me, teeth needle-sharp, and I slotted my pinky into the hollow where its tongue had lolled. I polished the sparrow's ribs with my spit until they gleamed like ivory piano keys, then strung them on fishing wire and hung them from my bedroom ceiling. They clattered in the draft, a skeletal wind chime. Dad found the jars of teeth first, milk glass containers stuffed with raccoon molars, squirrel incisors, a stray dog's cracked canine. They sat on my windowsill, catching the afternoon sun like amber. "Scientific curiosity," he said, adjusting his glasses, mistaking my shrine for ambition. He didn't see the rabbit ribs I kept tucked in my sock drawer, stripped of meat by beetles and time. At night I dragged my tongue along their curves, savoring the greasy residue of iron and earth, the taste of something that refused to stay gone. Once a shard nicked my lip and I let the blood pool under my tongue, metallic and warm, until it mixed with the rot. It felt like communion. High school was a carnival of forced normalcy, a gauntlet of flickering fluorescent lights that buzzed like wasps trapped in glass. The halls reeked of ammonia and adolescent desperation. Axle body spray, strawberry lip gloss, the tang of blood from fistfights behind the gym. I learned to mirror the rituals, slapping backs in the locker room, laughing too loud at the vice principal's stale jokes, scribbling "Go Titans" on crumpled binder paper. At lunch I'd nod along to debates about football stats, or the merits of Led Zeppelin versus the Rolling Stones, all while tracing the blue highways of veins on my classmates' necks. Jennifer Marlowe's pulsed visibly when she leaned over the chem lab table, her pearl necklace dipping into a beaker of sulfuric acid. Thump, thump, thump. A rabbit's heartbeat beneath honey blonde hair. I pressed my pencil tip to the page, until the blade snapped, imagining how her carotid would feel under my thumb. Warm, elastic, a living garden hose. Chemistry became my sanctuary. Mr. Haskins praised my precision with the Bunsen burner, how I could titrate solutions to exacting milliliters. He didn't know I'd linger after class, stealing slivers of sodium metal from the supply closet. At home, I dropped them into mason jars of water, watching them skitter and scream across the surface before erupting into flame. That's what it's like, I'd think. The moment before death, beautiful, violent, inevitable. Nights were worse. My bedroom walls throbbed with shadows cast by passing headlights, and I'd lie rigid beneath sweat-stiffened sheets, listening to the neighbor's yapping terrier. The urges slithered up from someplace deep, hotter and denser than the sodium fires. I'd imagine someone beside me, not a sweetheart, not a fantasy, just a body. A boy from shop class, maybe, with sawdust in his curls and carpenter's hands. I picture him motionless, eyes wide and unblinking, as I arranged his limbs into tableaus, one arm draped over the bedside lamp, the other curled like a question mark. Stay, I'd whisper into the dark, fingernails carving crescents into my palms. Stay forever. Once during a pep rally I nearly lost control. The gymnasium roared with cheers, a tsunami of noise that vibrated in my molars. Bobby Fischer, the quarterback, with a lazy grin and a healed cleft palate, collapsed onto the bleachers next to me, reeking of brewed cologne and weed. "Wild game, huh?" he said, elbow jabbing my ribs. A drop of sweat slid down his temple, and I tracked its path to his jawline, hypnotized. My hands twitched in my lap, rehearsing the motions. Grip, squeeze, hold. The band launched into a mangled rendition of Celebration, and he turned away, shouting something at the cheerleaders. I spent the rest of the hour chewing my inner cheek until I tasted copper, the rhythm of his pulse tattooing itself behind my eyelids. By senior year, I'd mastered the art of vanishing. Teachers wrote quiet but capable on my report cards. Girls giggled that I was mysterious. They didn't see the sketches hidden under my mattress. Anatomical diagrams with bones labeled in Latin, torsos splayed open like gutted fish. Prom night, I sat on the roof, legs dangling over the gutter, and watched taillights spiral out of the parking lot. The moon hung low, a bone disc picked clean. Somewhere, a car radio thumped out disco beats. I closed my eyes and let the fantasy unspool. A body in the trunk. Mind to study. Mind to perfect. Not yet, but soon. The first time was August 22, 1978. A day so thick with humidity the air felt like a fever dream. Cicadas screamed in the oaks along Route 18, their shrill chorus drowning out the radio static bleeding from my AMC gremlin. Stephen Hicks stood there, thumb hooked toward the asphalt, his denim jacket frayed at the cuffs and streaked with road dust. Up close he smelled like Marlboro Reds and gasoline, his knuckles tattooed with faded ink. A skull, a rose, the word mom. Guitar calluses roughened his fingertips when he shook my hand, and I wondered how they'd feel pressed to my windpipe. The basement was a tomb of damp concrete and mildew. Schlitz bottles sweated onto the workbench where Dad once tinkered with broken radios, their guts spilling coils and transistors. Steven's laugh cracked like a vinyl record skipping ha 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 as he gulped a beer. Adam's apple bobbing like a fishing lure. Gonna see the ocean, he said, tilting his head back. The lamplight carved shadows into the hollow of his throat. A valley I wanted to fill with my fingerprint. He talked about Santa Monica Pier, about sunsets that melted into the Pacific, about a girl named Luann who played tambourine in a psychedelic band. His voice was a campfire story, warm, flickering doom. When he stood to leave, the dumbbell was cold in my grip, a 10-pound iron comma. He was halfway up the stairs humming Hotel California when I swung. The sound was wrong. Not a crack, but a thud, like a shovel splitting wet soil. He crumpled backward, skull kissing concrete, and for a heartbeat, we locked eyes. His were the blue of gas flames widening into circles of pure animal terror. Then the twitching began. He didn't die clean. His fingers, those callous guitar string fingers, dug into my wrists, etching half moons that bloomed scarlet. I straddled his chest, knees pinning his arms, and watched his legs piston uselessly against the floor. His breath came in wet hitches, each one spraying flecks of blood onto my chin. I counted them 1, 2, 17. His pupils swelled like ink blots, devouring the blue until his eyes were black pits, bottomless and hungry. When the gurgling stopped, I pressed my ear to his chest. Silent. Later I peeled his shirt off, a faded black Sabbath tee damp with sweat, and traced the bruises flowering beneath his collarbone. They were lavender at the edges, deepening to plum where the capillaries had burst. Beautiful, in their way. His jeans were still warm when I undid the buckle, the metal teeth clinking like loose change. I expected revulsion, shame. Instead, there was only curiosity, the same itch that drove me to dissect frogs in biology class. His skin yielded under my knife, parting like ripe fruit, and I marveled at the machinery inside. Tendons like piano wires, fat marbled like steak, ribs cradling lungs that would never inhale salt air. By dawn, the floor was a Jackson Pollock of blood and bile. I scrubbed until my hands blistered, humming Hotel California to drown out the flies. His bones, stripped and scrubbed with bleach, fit into a Folger's can, buried beneath the hydrangeas. For weeks I'd visit the spot, pressing my palm to the earth as if I could feel his heartbeat through the soil. But the ground stayed cold, silent. The army tried to mold me into something useful, a cog in a machine that ran on polished boots and blind obedience. They taught me to disassemble an M16 rifle in 28 seconds flat, my fingers dancing over pins and springs, as if they were extensions of my own bones. But they couldn't disassemble me. The hunger gnawed deeper there, fed by the rhythm of drills and the stink of gun oil. At night I'd lie rigid in my bunk, staring at the barracks' water-stained ceiling, while the men around me snored in a chorus of wet animal sounds. Their bodies blurred in the dark, meat sacks wrapped in olive drab, vulnerable as newborns. I'd imagine creeping down the aisle, bayonet in hand, parting each set of ribs like theater curtains. Sergeant Callahan's bunk reeked of chew and foot powder. Private Ruiz hummed in his sleep, a tuneless dirge. I'd count their breaths, timing the gaps between until my fingernails pierced my palms. They discharged me honorably, though not cleanly. It was the incident in the mess hall that did it. A kitchen knife clutched too long in my grip. My reflection warped in its blade as I sliced through a crate of onions. Corporal Jenkins made a joke about my serial killer stare. The onion fumes burned my eyes to tears, but I didn't blink. Later they found the drawings in my footlocker. Detailed cross-sections of throats, arrows pointing to carotid arteries, margins filled with calculations of blood flow rates. The shrink called it morbid curiosity, stamped my papers, and sent me home with a handshake and a 20% disability check. Grandma's house was a time capsule of talcum powder and regret. The floral wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing layers of yellowed glue and newsprint from the 50s. She'd shuffle into my room at dawn, her housecoat trailing the scent of mothballs and mentholatum, to leave jello salads wobbling on chipped depression glass. Lime green, cherry red, glistening cubes suspended in syrup like specimens in formaldehyde. Her knuckles, swollen with arthritis, brushed mine when she passed the plate. Skin papery as shed snake scales. "You'll feel better with something sweet in your belly," she'd whisper, not noticing how I'd dissect the gelatin with my fork. Studying the way it quivered before splitting, I'd smile, nod, chew each bite slowly. The sweetness clung to my teeth, cloying as guilt. At night, while she snored through the Tonight Show, I'd sketch maps of the nearby highways in the margins of her TV guide, marking rest stops and trucker diners with tiny X's. The freezer hummed in the garage, empty except for frost-rimed trays of ice cubes and a venison roast from 1972. I'd run my hand over its icy surface, imagining how much colder it'd need to be. 3 months in, Grandma found the rabbit carcass under the porch, a snowshoe hare I'd trapped in the woods, its hind legs snapped in a rusted coil spring. "Coyotes," she sighed, crossing herself. I watched her bury it in the petunia bed, rosary beads clacking, and wondered if she'd weep as hard for me. That night I boiled its skull in her soup pot, scrubbing the bone with her toothbrush until it gleamed. She served meatloaf the next day, gray and weeping grease, while the hare's empty sockets stared up from my windowsill. Stephen Tuomi died in room 217 of the Ambassador Motel, a Milwaukee flophouse where the paisley wallpaper curled like dead skin and the air tasted of menthol cigarettes and mandu. He bought me rum and cokes all night, his voice slurry and loose, thumbs hooked in the belt loops of his Levi's. "Bartender's toupee's a fucking raccoon carcass," he'd slurred, sloshing his drink toward the mirror. The neon Schlitz sign outside pulsed red through the blinds, staining his teeth pink when he laughed. I remember the heat of his thigh pressed to mine on the lumpy mattress, the way his Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, the sour tang of Coke syrup on his breath. He fumbled with his belt buckle, a silver eagle with chipped wings, and whispered something about his ex-wife's dimple. The blackout came swift, absolute. One moment, his calloused palm was skimming my hip bone, his chapped lips grazing my earlobe. The next, stillness. A void. When consciousness seeped back, dawn painted the room in bruised hue. Stephen lay beside me, eyes open and glazed as hard candy, his neck twisted at an angle that made his trachea protrude like a knuckle. Rum pooled in the hollow of his throat, sticky and amber. I didn't remember wrapping my hands around his windpipe, didn't remember the thrashing, the wet gurgle, the final shudder. But I knew the room stank of bile and iron. I rolled him onto his back, tracing the roadmap of his body, the scar on his knee from a childhood bike crash, the tattoo of a swallow above his left nipple faded, wings clipped, the 11 moles scattered across his torso like constellations. His skin had already cooled to the temperature of the motel sheets. I pressed my tongue to his sternum, lapping at the salt-dried sweat, and felt something unspool inside me. This, I thought, is how communion should taste. Outside, a semi-truck roared down the interstate. I dressed him carefully, buttoned his shirt crooked, laced his boots loose, and propped him against the headboard. The rising sun sliced through the blinds, striping his chest into a butcher's diagram, sternum, ribs, xiphoid process. I sketched him in my notebook, shading the shadows beneath his collarbones, while the ice machine down the hall thumped and groaned. By checkout time, rigor mortis had set in. I tucked the key under the office door and drove west, his belt buckle rattling in my glove compartment. That night, in a roadside diner outside Des Moines, I ordered steak rare and dissected it with surgical precision. The blood pooled on the plate, black in the fluorescence. Across the booth, a trucker laughed too loud, his neck flushed and vein. I counted his moles, 9, and licked my knife clean. The apartment became a cathedral of rot. A shrine where the air curdled into something sacred. Sunlight strained through grease-smeared windows, casting prisms on walls tacky with flypaper and dried bleach. I'd boil skulls in a stockpot stolen from Goodwill, the broth frothing with flecks of marrow and hair, while disco beats oozed from my cassette player. Night fever rattled the hot plate as I skimmed the scum, gray foam that smelled like pork left in the rain. The freezer groaned under the weight of Ziploc rainbows, livers like deflated balloons, fingertips puckered as dried apricots, hearts glazed in frost like candied apples. I'd press my cheek to the door, listening to its asthmatic hum, and imagine the cold seeping into my veins. Konarak's whimpers were the worst. Not human, not animal. A sound like a wounded sparrow trapped in a soda can. He'd thrash against the handcuffs, wrists raw and glistening, while I stroked his hair with the tenderness of a lover. Shh, I'd murmur, thumbing the sweat from his temples. You'll feel better soon. The drill bit's whine drowned his screams, its spiral edge kissing the divot I'd carved above his ear. I'd read somewhere about lobotomies, about ice picks and happy accidents, but the pink slurry pooling in the grooves of his skull told me I'd missed the mark. When he escaped, naked, drugged, bleeding clarity onto the sidewalk, the cops brought him back like a lost dog. The cops brought him back like a lost dog. They swaddled him in a moth-eaten blanket, his pupils blown wide as a fawn's in headlights, and chuckled when I called him my boyfriend. Lovers quarrel, one muttered, winking as they left. I locked the door behind them, pressed my forehead to the wood, and laughed until my ribs ached. The absurdity of it, their breath fogging the stench of death, their badges gleaming like tin toys. I almost wanted to hug them. That night I soaked Konarak's socks in chablis, and fed him slivers of Valium like communion wafers. He stared at the ceiling, tears carving paths through the grime on his cheeks, while I threaded fishing wire through the holes in his skull. See? I whispered, nodding the ends. Now we're connected. The wire glinted in the lamplight, a silver spiderweb, and for a moment I thought I saw his lips twitch, not a smile, a tremor. By dawn the apartment buzzed with flies drawn to the sweet-sour reek of infection. I lit vanilla candles to mask it, the wax pooling around their saints and angels, and hummed along to the radio. A preacher raved about salvation. Outside a car backfired. Konarak's breath hitched, then stilled. I sat cross-legged on the floor, cradling his cooling hand, and wondered if God's silence felt this heavy. Tracy Edwards fought like a feral thing, all teeth and tendons and animal desperation. The handcuffs had held him for 3 days, their chrome teeth gnawing his wrists to raw meat. But he'd been saving strength, hoarding it in the quiet hours while I dozed beside him, lulled by the drone of infomercials. When he lunged, it was with the grace of a feral cat, nails raking my cheek in a hot arc, beads of blood blooming on his white tank top like roses stitched into snow. The pain was electric, alive, and for a heartbeat I admired him. He used the bed frame as a weapon next, slamming his weight against it, until the bolts screamed loose from the wall, the mattress sliding sideways like a corpse off a gurney. His elbow caught my sternum, a crack that echoed through the rot-stink air of the apartment, and suddenly it was up, a shadow puppet jerking toward the door. The room held its breath. Moonlight sliced through the bullet hole in the curtain, illuminating motes of dust that swirled like ash around his silhouette. He fumbled with the deadbolt hands slick with sweat, with my blood, with the strawberry syrup I dribbled into his coke to mask the sleeping pills, and then he was gone, the door slamming against the wall hard enough to dislodge a framed photo of my grandmother. It shattered on the floor, glass teeth grinning up at me from the linoleum. I stood very still. The handcuffs dangled from the bed frame, clicking in the draft like a metronome, counting down the seconds. My cigarette trembled in my grip, the match's sulfur still clinging to my tongue. I inhaled deeply, letting the ember's ache spread through my ribs, and watched the blood from my cheek patter onto Tracy's abandoned sneakers. Outside, a dog barked. A car backfired. Somewhere beyond the alley, a siren warbled to life, thin at first, then swelling into a throaty scream. The apartment sighed around me. The freezer shuddered, its motor grinding like bad teeth. Polaroids of the others trembled on their clothesline above the sink. Smiling faces smeared with grease from the hamburger buns I'd burned last Tuesday. I traced the bite mark on my ferrum still throbbing from Tracy's last act of defiance, and smiled. Let them come. Let them see what I built here. The altar of bone, the symphony of rot, the love that outlasted death. The first police cruiser skidded into the alley, its spotlight carving a white scar across the ceiling. I crushed the cigarette into an empty soup can, savoring the hiss of dying embers, and buttoned my shirt to hide the bruises. Through the window I counted shadows, 2 officers, maybe 3, and wondered if they'd bring Tracy with them. I hoped so. I wanted him to watch. They found the Polaroids first, strewn across the kitchen table like a tarot deck predicting damnation. The rookie cop picked one up, gloved fingers leaving smudges on the glossy edge, and tilted it toward the flickering overhead bulb. A boy no older than 17 stared back, his head lolling to one side as if listening to a secret, the sunbeam slicing through the motel curtains to illuminate the braided rope marks around his throat. His lips were parted, not in a scream but a sigh, as though death had slipped in on a breath. Another photo surfaced, a different boy, shirtless, draped in Christmas lights that coiled around his torso like neon veins, their bulbs casting a sickly green glow on his waxen skin. His smile was slack, his eyes half-lidded, a trickle of dried saliva webbing his chin. The cop's throat clicked as he swallowed. "This is real," he whispered, more to himself than his partner, thumbing the crimped edge of the film as if hoping it'd dissolve. I almost corrected him. Was real. Now they were just chemical ghosts. Silver nitrate and dye couplers fading under the weight of time. The boys in the photos were gone, their bodies fed to the furnace or dissolved in acid baths. But here they lingered, frozen in the afterglow of my curation. The older cop flipped through the stack with trembling hands. Each Polaroid hissed against the next. A morbid flipbook. A mannequin pale figure posed with a teddy bear clutched to his chest. Another splayed in a clawfoot tub, water-tinted pink, his hair fanning out like seaweed. A close-up of hands arranged in prayer, fingertips blue as twilight. The rookie gagged, glove flying to his mouth, and stumbled toward the bathroom. His partner didn't notice. He'd frozen on a photo of Konarak, alive then, propped against the headboard, with a crown of barbed wire resting askew on his brow. Blood jeweled his temples and his eyes were wide, unfocused, the flash bleaching his irises to milky moons. Jesus Christ, the cop muttered, dropping the photo like it scolded him. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up beside a half-eaten bowl of ramen, broth congealed into a greasy lens. I leaned against the wall, handcuffs biting into my wrists, and studied the way the light caught the dust motes stirred by their panic. The apartment seemed smaller now, crowded with their horror. The rookie retched violently in the bathroom, his vomit splattering the tiles I'd scrubbed with ammonia 3 days prior. His partner radioed for backup, voice cracking over the static, while the Polaroids trembled in the draft from the broken window. I focused on the stain above the door frame, a Rorschach blot of mildew I'd always meant to clean, and smiled. They thought they'd uncovered the worst of me, but they hadn't found the others yet. The shoebox beneath the floorboards stuffed with locks of hair, the VHS tapes labeled home movies, the hollowed-out library books, where I'd pressed skin like autumn leaves. Let them unravel it all. Let them see how carefully I'd loved. Prison was a relief. No more rehearsed flinches at thunderclaps. No more hollow laughter at birthday cards signed by ghosts. The fluorescent buzz of the cell block soothed me, a sterile hymn replacing the cacophony of my mother's sobs, my father's clinical dismissals. Here the rules were simple. Steel bars, slop trays, men who smelled of nicotine and unwashed rape. In the showers they pressed themselves against the tiles as I passed, their fear a balm thicker than the steam curling off their skin. I tilled my face into the spray, savoring the way the water needled my scalp, and think of Konarak's blood swirling down the drain. They called me Doc in the yard, voices tinged with revulsion and awe. I'd sit on the bleachers picking at my meatloaf and count the scars on their knuckles like a philatelist cataloging stamp. At night, the screams of the newly shanked echoed through the vents. A lullaby that drowned out their urges or maybe just harmonized with them. I dreamed of freezer burn and Polaroid smiles, of bones bleached whiter than the prison chapel's pew. Christopher Scarver's metal bar felt like forgiveness. It happened in the library between the dog-eared Stephen King paperbacks and the guard's abandoned Playboy. I was reshelving Gray's Anatomy, my fingers lingering on the diagram of the vagus nerve, when the first blow struck. My glasses cartwheeled into the shadows, lenses fracturing the world into a watercolor smear, concrete bleeding into sky. Scarver's face a smudged thumbprint of rage. The second swing split my brow, warm blood shooting into my eyes, and suddenly I was 14 again, crouched in the hallway as my parents' voices shattered like glass. The third strike never came. Or maybe it did. Time bled, syrupy and thick. I tasted copper, felt the grit of the floor against my cheek, and realized I was laughing. Not at Scarver, not at the guard's shouts, but at the silence. The one I'd carried since childhood, a leaden husk lodged beneath my sternum, finally cracked open. No more buzzing of flies in the apartment, no more phantom pulses beneath my fingertips. Just the sweet, syrupy void. When the light faded, it wasn't a tunnel or a chorus of angels. It was the sputter of a dying fluorescent bulb, the scuff of boots on linoleum, and the distant wail of a siren that might have been inside my skull. The last thing I saw was my own hand, pale and still against the floor, fingers curled like a child's around an invisible rabbit rib. You'll ask why. You'll lean across the interrogation table, breath hot with coffee and contempt, and demand a reason, a diagnosis, a shadowy figure from my past to blame. Was it the mother who hid vodka in her laundry hamper? The father who dissected her with clinical indifference? Or the roadkill I cradled as a child, its bones gleaming like relics in the moonlight? You'll scribble notes, hungry for a story that threads the needle. Trauma begets monster. Monster begets blood. But some things don't have edge. They're black holes, swallowing light and logic. And if you press your ear to the void, you'll hear only your own pulse. I didn't hate them. I didn't love them. I wanted to be seen. Not as a son, a soldier, a shadow, but as a god. To hold something so still, so quiet, it couldn't leave. The boy in the bathtub, his hair fanned out like a halo. The man in the field, his ribs pried open like cathedral doors. I built religions from their stillness, altars from their marrow. When I pressed my palm to their cooling flesh, I felt power, not the cheap thrill of control, but the sublime certainty of creation. I was an artist, a surgeon, a priest. Look at me now. You've reduced me to mugshots and autopsy reports, a carnival freak behind plexiglass. But I'm everywhere. In the way your fingers twitch when you pass a hitchhiker, in the nightmares that coil around your throat when you read my name. You'll dissect my brain, pickle it in formaldehyde, and call it science. You'll write books, film documentaries, whisper my sins at slumber parties. But you'll never understand. The truth is in the Polaroids, the ones you locked in evidence boxes, their colors fading like old bruises. Look closely, see how the light caresses their faces, how their empty eyes hold more peace than your prayers ever could. I gave them eternity. I gave them silence. And when Christopher Scarver's metal bar cracked my skull, I finally understood the look in their eyes, that sweet, bottomless release. You'll never stop asking why, but the answer's in your reflection, in the dark water of your irises when you lie awake tonight, wondering what it would feel like to hold a life in your hands, and shape it into something that stays.